Logan Carter wiped the grease off his hands with a rag, sighing as he glanced at the clock. Nearly 7 in the evening. He had been working on the same stubborn truck for the past 3 hours, and his patience was wearing thin. Just as he was about to call it a day, the sound of tires crunching against gravel made him look up. A sleek rental car rolled into the lot of Carter's auto repair, steam hissing from under the hood. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped a woman, frustration clear on her face. She had dark brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, and her tank top and shorts made it obvious she wasn't from around here. No one in Willow Creek dressed like that in late September. Ugh. She groaned, slamming the door shut. This day just keeps getting worse. Logan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. Car trouble? She turned toward him, eyes full of exasperation. What gave it away, the smoke or the fact that my dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree? Despite her sarcasm, Logan chuckled. Let's take a look. He popped the hood and let out a low whistle. Overheated, probably a busted radiator hose. She groaned again, rubbing her temples. Great, just perfect. This is exactly what I needed. Logan glanced at her. You passing through? She nodded. Yeah, was on my way to a cabin rental just outside town, some solo getaway thing, except now I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere. Logan raised an eyebrow. Willow Creek isn't exactly nowhere, she gave him a look. I'm from Chicago, this is the definition of nowhere, he smirked. Well, welcome to small town life. She sighed and extended her hand. Avery Brooks, Logan Carter. He shook her hand, noting how small it felt in his calloused grip. He cleared his throat. I can fix your car, but it won't be ready until tomorrow. The part you need isn't in stock, I'll have to get it in the morning. Avery let out a defeated sigh. Of course, so what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Pitch a tent in your parking lot. Logan wiped his brow. There's a bed and breakfast a couple of blocks down, I can give you a ride if you need it. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, okay, thanks. Logan grabbed his keys and they climbed into his truck. The ride was quiet at first, Avery staring out the window as they passed the quiet streets of Willow Creek. So what made you come out here? Logan asked. She exhaled. Honestly, I just needed a break. Work's been insane, life's been complicated, figured a remote cabin would help clear my head. Logan nodded. He knew that feeling well. They pulled up to the bed and breakfast, a charming little inn with white shutters and a wraparound porch. Avery turned to him, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Thanks for the ride, Logan, and for not leaving me stranded. Anytime, he said, tipping his head. I'll have your car ready by noon tomorrow. She gave him a small smile before heading inside. Logan watched her disappear through the doors, something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but one thing was certain: he hadn't expected a stranded tourist to leave him feeling this unsettled. Logan hadn't expected to think about Avery Brooks after dropping her off. But as he closed up the shop for the night and drove home, she lingered in his thoughts. There was something about her, something restless, like she was running from something she didn't want to name. He knew the look well. The next morning, he was at the shop before sunrise. He called in an order for the radiator hose and got to work on another car while waiting for the part to arrive. Just as he was wiping his hands on a rag, the sound of footsteps approaching made him look up. Avery stood in the doorway, her arms crossed against the morning chill. I walked over, she said before he could ask. Figured I'd check in on my car. Logan leaned against the workbench. Part should be here within the hour. You sleep okay? She huffed a laugh. Barely. Small town silence is louder than Chicago traffic, he smirked. You'll get used to it. She gave him a skeptical look but didn't argue. Instead, she wandered the shop, trailing her fingers over the edge of a tool chest. This yours? Family business, Logan said. My dad started it. I took over when he retired. Avery nodded, considering that. You like it? Logan thought for a moment before shrugging. Yeah, it's honest work. Keeps me busy. She studied him, her expression unreadable. Huh. Before he could ask what that meant, the shop phone rang. The part was in. Logan grabbed his keys. "Come on, ride with me to pick it up." Avery hesitated, then followed him to the truck. The drive was quiet at first, the early morning air still crisp. "You always live here?" she asked after a while. "Born and raised," Logan said. "Guess that sounds boring to a city girl like you." She glanced at him. "Not boring, just different. I can't imagine staying in one place my whole life." Logan considered that. "And I can't imagine leaving. Guess we're opposites." Avery smirked. "Guess so." They picked up the part and drove back, and Logan got to work on her car while Avery leaned against the wall, watching. "You don't have to wait around," he said, tightening a bolt. She shrugged. "Not much else to do." He glanced up. "You could explore the town, grab breakfast at Miller's Diner, best pancakes in Willow Creek." Avery smirked. "I'll take your word for it." An hour later, he wiped his hands clean. "All set, you're good to go." Avery stared at the car, then let out a slow breath. "Right." Logan studied her. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just guess I didn't expect to leave so soon." Something in Logan's chest tightened, but he pushed it down. "Well, if you ever break down again, you know where to find me," Avery chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind." She climbed into the car, started the engine, and gave him one last look. "Thanks for everything, Logan," he nodded. "Safe travels." She hesitated for just a second before putting the car in gear and driving off. Logan watched her go, an unexpected hollowness settling in his chest. He hadn't known her for more than a day, but somehow it felt like something was slipping away before he even had the chance to hold on to it. Logan wasn't the kind of man who let things linger in his head. He had responsibilities, routine. But for the rest of the day, he found himself distracted, his mind drifting back to the woman who had driven away that morning. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the shop, he had all but convinced himself to forget about her. People passed through Willow Creek all the time. She was just another traveler with someplace else to be. And yet, when he walked into Miller's Diner that evening, the last thing he expected was to see Avery Brooks sitting in a booth by the window, stirring a cup of coffee with a faraway look in her eyes. His feet hesitated for a fraction of a second before he made his way over. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, sliding his hands into his pockets. Avery looked up, startled. Then she sighed and leaned back. "Yeah, well, turns out I'm not great at following through on plans." Logan raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" She let out a dry laugh. "I got to the cabin, parked my car, and then just sat there, staring at the trees. I don't know what I expected, but after about an hour I realized I didn't really want to be there. So I drove back into town and found this place." Logan glanced at the half-eaten slice of pie on her plate. "And here I thought you were just back for the pancakes." She smirked. "Tempting, but no." He nodded toward the empty seat across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She hesitated, then gestured for him to go ahead. A waitress came by and Logan ordered a coffee. He studied Avery as she traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly. There was something restless about her, like she was waiting for something, some kind of answer she hadn't found yet. "You always this indecisive?" he asked. She shot him a look. "You always this nosy?" he chuckled. "Only when someone shows up in my town, breaks down, then decides to come back for no reason." Avery sighed. "I had a reason, I just don't really know what it is yet." Logan took a sip of his coffee, considering her words. "You ever just feel lost?" She asked suddenly, her voice quieter now. He leaned back, watching her carefully. "Yeah," he admitted, "I have." She studied him, as if debating whether to say more. Then, after a pause, she shook her head. "Forget it. You probably didn't come here to listen to me ramble about my existential crisis." Logan smirked. "No, but it's not the worst conversation I've had in this diner." That got a small laugh out of her, and for a moment, the weight in her eyes lifted. They sat there for a while, the conversation drifting between easy small talk and moments of quiet. Logan told her about growing up in Willow Creek, about how he took over the shop from his dad. Avery told him about Chicago, about the constant rush of the city. Eventually, the diner started to clear out and Avery glanced at the clock. I should probably head back to the inn before they start thinking I'm squatting here. Logan pulled out his wallet and left some bills on the table. Come on, I'll walk you. She raised an eyebrow. Chivalry isn't dead in small towns, huh? He smirked. Something like that. The air was crisp as they stepped outside, the streets quiet except for the occasional flickering street lamp. They walked in comfortable silence, the inn just a few blocks away. You know, Avery said suddenly, I think I might stay a little longer. Logan glanced at her. Yeah, she nodded. Yeah, not forever, just long enough to figure some stuff out. He didn't ask what she meant by that, he just nodded. Well, if you need a tour guide, I know a guy, she smiled. Good to know. When they reached the inn, she hesitated on the steps, turning back to him. Thanks, Logan, for, not asking too many questions. He tipped his head. Anytime, city girl. She rolled her eyes but smiled before disappearing inside. Logan stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the start of something he never saw coming. The days stretched into something unexpected. Avery had fully intended to leave after a night or two, but something about Willow Creek kept her rooted in place. Maybe it was the quiet, the way the town seemed to breathe at a slower pace than Chicago. Or maybe it was the way Logan Carter looked at her like he saw something she wasn't sure she wanted anyone to see. She told herself she was just taking time to clear her head, but deep down, she knew better. Logan had become a constant presence. It started small, quick conversations when she strolled by the shop, an invitation to grab coffee at Miller's. Then, somehow, it became more. Evenings on the porch of the bed and breakfast, talking about everything and nothing. A walk through the farmer's market where he introduced her to half the town. A lazy Sunday spent by the lake when she mentioned she hadn't seen much of the area. It was easy being around him. Too easy. One evening, after another long conversation that stretched past sunset, Logan leaned against the wooden railing of the inn's porch and studied her. So what exactly are you running from? Avery stiffened, her fingers tightening around the mug of tea she had been nursing. Who says I'm running? He gave her a knowing look. You've been here a week. You had every intention of leaving, but you keep finding reasons to stay. She exhaled slowly, staring out at the quiet street. I needed a break. From what? She hesitated. No one in Willow Creek knew who she was. That was part of the appeal, but Logan made her want to say things she wouldn't normally say. My job, she admitted finally, my life in general. She could feel his eyes on her, steady and patient. I work in corporate marketing, she continued. It's fast-paced, competitive. I was good at it, I still am. But a few months ago, I started feeling like. She trailed off, searching for the right words. Like I was suffocating, I kept pushing through, ignoring it. Then one day, I walked out of a meeting, got in my car, and just drove. Logan didn't say anything at first. Then quietly he asked, and have you figured it out yet? What you want? Avery let out a short laugh, shaking her head. Not even close, he smirked. Well, you've got time, she glanced at him. You always this patient, he shrugged. Only when it matters. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, Logan had become her safe place. And that terrified her. The next day, she tried to put some distance between them, not because she wanted to, but because she knew she had to. She wasn't staying in Willow Creek. She couldn't let herself get attached to something that wasn't meant to last. But Logan Carter was persistent in ways she hadn't expected. That afternoon, he showed up at the inn with an old motorcycle helmet in his hands. Avery blinked at him. What's this? Logan smirked. You said you've seen the town, but you haven't really seen it. She raised an eyebrow. And you're offering what, a grand tour? Something like that, she hesitated. She should have said no. Should have walked back into the inn and reminded herself that this wasn't permanent. Instead, she found herself reaching for the helmet. Logan's motorcycle was older, well-worn, but it fit him. Strong, steady, reliable, just like the man himself. She climbed on behind him, hesitant at first, but when he told her to hold on, she didn't think twice before wrapping her arms around his waist. He took her through winding backroads, past golden fields that stretched for miles, through thick forests where the air smelled like pine. They stopped at an overlook, the entire town spread out below them, the lake shimmering in the distance. Avery climbed off the bike, pulling the helmet from her head as she took it all in. "Okay," she admitted, "this is kind of incredible." Logan chuckled, leaning against the bike. "Told you." She turned to face him, the wind tugging at her hair. "Why did you really bring me here?" His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. "Because you keep trying to pretend you don't belong here," Avery swallowed hard. "I don't." Logan held her gaze. "Don't you?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with something unspoken, something dangerous. Avery took a step back, breaking the spell. "I should probably get back." Logan studied her for a beat longer before nodding. "All right." The ride back was quiet, tension thick in the air. When they reached the inn, Avery climbed off the bike, hesitating before handing the helmet back. "Thanks for the ride," Logan nodded. "Anytime." She turned to go, but before she could step inside, he said, "Avery." She faced him again. He took a step closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to run forever." She didn't have an answer for that, so she did what she always did. She walked away. Avery didn't leave. She told herself it was because she still hadn't figured out what she wanted, that she needed more time, more space to clear her head. But deep down, she knew the truth. It was him. Logan Carter had settled into her mind in a way she hadn't expected, in a way she hadn't wanted. He was steady and sure, the kind of man who didn't push but also didn't let things go unnoticed. And the way he looked at her like he saw something more, something deeper, made it harder and harder to pretend she wasn't feeling this pull between them. A week turned into 2. She tried to keep her distance, but Willow Creek was too small for avoidance. Logan was everywhere: the shop, the diner, the town square. And every time she saw him, her pulse did that stupid, annoying thing where it jumped just a little too fast. It was a Friday evening when everything finally came to a breaking point. The town was hosting a fall festival, the streets lined with twinkling lights, the scent of cinnamon and roasted apples filling the air. Avery hadn't planned on going, but Millie, the diner owner, had insisted. "You can't just sit in that inn forever," she'd scolded. "Go, have fun, meet people." Avery had rolled her eyes but agreed. Now, standing in the middle of the town square, she realized there was only one person she really wanted to see. And, as if the universe had been waiting for her to admit it, Logan appeared. He was near one of the booths, laughing at something a friend had said, his head tilted back in that easy, confident way of his. The sight of him sent a stupid flutter through her chest. Then he looked up. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a second, everything else faded. Logan didn't hesitate. He crossed the distance between them, hands in his pockets, that slow, deliberate stride making her stomach twist. "You came," he said when he reached her. Avery exhaled a small laugh. "Millie forced me," he smirked. "Sounds about right." For a moment they just stood there, the air between them charged with something neither wanted to say out loud. Then Logan tilted his head toward the booths. "Come on, you ever tried an apple cider donut?" She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a serious question?" "Good. Then you know you're about to have the best one of your life." She rolled her eyes, but let him lead her through the festival. They spent the next hour wandering through the booths, sampling food, watching the small live band play near the gazebo. It was easy, too easy. Laughing with him, standing too close, brushing against him when the crowd tightened around them. It wasn't until they reached the outskirts of the festival, where the lights dimmed and the noise softened, that the weight of everything started pressing in. Logan stopped near an old wooden fence, resting his hands on the top rail. Avery hesitated before stepping beside him. "You thinking about leaving again?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She stared at the darkened fields beyond the fence. "I don't know." Logan was silent for a moment. Then, softly, he said, "I think you do." Avery swallowed hard. "Logan, you're scared," he cut in, turning to face her. "I get it. You don't do things like this, you don't stay in places like this, you don't let yourself get attached." Her heart pounded. "That's not, it is," he said, stepping closer. "And I'm not gonna stand here and pretend I don't know what this is, what's happening between us." Avery's breath hitched. Logan shook his head, exhaling sharply. "You can tell yourself this was just a stop along the way, that I was just someone to pass the time with, but you know that's not true." Her chest tightened painfully. "Logan, tell me I'm wrong," he challenged, his voice rough. "Tell me you don't feel this." She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because he wasn't wrong. He was everything she hadn't realized. She'd been searching for steady where she was restless, grounded where she felt lost. Being with him made her feel like she could breathe again, but that terrified her. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan's expression softened. "Then let me show you." The words broke something inside her. Before she could stop herself, she reached for him. Logan caught her around the waist, pulling her in, and then his lips were on hers, warm, insistent, full of something desperate and real. Avery melted into him, her fingers gripping his shirt as he deepened the kiss, as if he had been waiting for this for far too long. When they finally pulled apart, their breaths were uneven, foreheads pressed together. Logan cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "Stay," he murmured. Avery's heart clenched. She wanted to. God, she wanted to, but wanting something and knowing how to have it were two different things, and she wasn't sure she knew how to stay. Avery didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that kiss, of Logan's hands on her waist, of the way he had whispered stay like it was the simplest thing in the world. But it wasn't simple. She had spent her entire life chasing something: success, ambition, movement. The idea of staying anywhere, of putting down roots, had never been part of the plan. And yet here she was, caught between what she had always known and the terrifying, undeniable pull of Logan Carter. By morning, her decision was made. She had to leave. Not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know how to be the kind of person who stayed. She packed her bags in silence, her chest tight, her hands shaking more than she wanted to admit. Every part of her screamed that this was wrong, that she was walking away from something real. But fear was louder. She checked out of the inn, loaded her suitcase into the trunk, and climbed into the driver's seat. Her fingers curled around the wheel. Just turn the key, just drive. But her hands wouldn't move, because all she could think about was Logan, the way he had looked at her last night, the way his voice had softened when he asked her to stay. A sharp knock on her window made her jump. Her breath caught when she saw him standing there, hands braced on the roof of her car. Eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent her pulse racing. She hesitated before rolling down the window. "You were just gonna leave." His voice was rough, edged with something she couldn't name. Avery swallowed hard. "Logan, without saying goodbye." He cut in, his jaw tight. She exhaled shakily, resting her forehead against the steering wheel for a moment before forcing herself to look at him. "I didn't know what to say." His eyes searched hers, something unreadable flickering across his face. "You could have said you weren't ready, that you were scared, that you needed time." Avery's throat tightened. Logan shook his head, stepping back, "But instead you decided to run." "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never," she broke off, her hands gripping the wheel. "I don't know how to be the kind of person who stays." Logan exhaled, his expression softening just enough to make her chest ache. "Then don't stay for forever, stay for now." Avery blinked. "Stay for the mornings at Millie's, for slow walks through town," he continued. Stay for the lake, for the way the leaves turn gold in the fall. Stay for me. Her heart pounded. You don't have to have it all figured out, Avery, Logan said quietly. But don't walk away from something real just because it scares you. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment she knew that leaving wouldn't make her feel safe. It would only make her feel empty. Wordlessly, she shut off the engine and climbed out of the car. Logan watched her, his posture tense like he was waiting for the final blow. Instead, she stepped closer, hesitated for only a second before gripping the front of his jacket and pulling him in. His arms wrapped around her instantly, holding her like he had no intention of letting go. You win, she murmured against his chest. Logan let out a soft, relieved laugh, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It was never about winning, city girl. She tilted her head up, meeting his gaze. Then what was it about? His fingers brushed against her cheek, his expression tender. It was always about you. Avery swallowed past the lump in her throat. She wasn't sure what came next. She still had fears, still had things to figure out. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running. And as Logan leaned in, kissing her like she was something worth holding on to, she realized she had already found exactly where she was meant to be.